Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. Today, I am joined once again by Karl Moore from McGill University. And Karl, I'm super excited to have you back on the show, to celebrate your latest book, on Generation Y and understanding and leading Millennials and Generation Z. And so to kind of, before we get kicking off today, from what I understand, it's a postmodern worldview of younger generations entering the workforce, right? And I think this is key, especially with the way things have evolved over the last, couple of decades. So to kind of kick off today's conversation, what are the core values and beliefs that drive Millennials and Generation Z in the workplace?
Well, what I'm arguing in the book is that people over 45 to a degree, people like me, were taught a modern worldview. People under 35 with a degree, people like yourself, Ben, were taught a postmodern worldview. So it's your worldview is substantially different between these two generations. And the postmodern is a more accurate worldview. There's more truth to it than the modern worldview. In fact, postmodern means after modern. So the modern worldview was rejected for good reason, but the boomers and the Xers are still at times stuck in the past. So it's incumbent on us to understand the world that you see, the lens you see it through, and it's one that's significantly different. So that's the key message of the book, is that we better understand the worldview of younger people and lean into it, because they are the future of our organizations without a doubt.
That makes a lot of sense. But a question I kind of want to ask, following up on that is in what way do you find the viewpoints different between these generations? And what exactly is the gap where they can both showcase or teach something to each other?
Well, something where the modern worldview is about truth, hierarchy, what is the nature of leadership. So when you look at it philosophically, it's interesting, and it comes out of the schools of philosophy and English literature and so on. But when I looked at that literature some years ago and got to know the theory, this really struck me as absolutely relevant to leadership. So, for example, there's less hierarchy. It's not the death of hierarchy, but the decline of hierarchy between the modern and the postmodern. Less hierarchy. There's also the nature of truth is less certain in a postmodern worldview. So there used to be this much truth when I was young. Now there's this much truth. There's still truth, but it's much less than there used to be. Therefore, there's more of a sense of uncertainty about the world. And to one degree, your story is as good as my story. Where in the past, the older person with more experience, their story was, and they had more, typically more hierarchy as well, would be absolutely reigning over the younger person's story. But when you look at the postmodern worldview, that impacts how we lead, how we work with each other, and the sense of what young people are looking for out of their leaders, the people they work for.
Okay, cool. So then, Karl, how can managers create, a work environment that aligns with postmodern worldview of younger generations then?
Well, certainly less hierarchical, less I'm the boss, what don't you understand? I wrote an article for the Globe back in 2018. It was the second most read article for the year. And what it was entitled was Never Apologize, Never Explain Bad Ideas with Millennials. And when I was young, there was an expression, never apologize, never explain. I'm the boss, what don't you understand? I'm, the Lord, I'm the lady. This sort of thing where there was a sense of entitlement for those at the top. What I say today is apologize easily and explain everything. That's why it's called Generation Y, is what we want to do is explain things that in the past we just say, take my word for it. But by explaining things, what I do is I allow younger people to rightly point out the flaws of my thinking. To go, hey, that was true, but today's world, it's no longer true. So you have some great thinking, but there's a flaw in it here. So I want younger people, which is almost everybody in my case, to be able to respond to my concerns, my thinking, and show me where it's flawed and how we must adjust it to do a better strategy in today's world. So those are a couple of things that come to my mind, at least.
I love that, Karl. And what it makes me think of too is any individual, whether it's, a manager, a leader, or any type of person, we all have blind spots, right? And we also have biases, right? And so we should always be challenged, right? If we're trying to, reach a better version of ourselves, we should always be challenged on those spots, right? And so that's something that I love about it, in terms of the why. But a question I have for you is like, who is an example? You've sat down with a lot of, managers or even CEOs across the world. Who is an example of someone that really establishes or, embraces this kind of new view of thinking?
Well, something where, I have a CEO radio show, so I interview CEOs every week, and then I have a CEO class for the MBA. So interview maybe 80, 100 CEOs a year. There's been an evolution in their thinking in terms of how to approach people, how to listen, how to learn from them, which is very different than, 10, 15 years ago. A real change there. And, so I think of Bombardier as a company where it's one of our bigger companies. It's gone in this direction, I think, in a fairly healthy way. CAE, another company that is doing this, I think, in a good way. Lino Saputo from Saputo Cheese, interviewed him last week for an hour and a half. These are some people come to mind that are more taking on board these ideas and living them out. But I see it as a broad movement. We're going in that direction among most CEOs, though some are better than others, of course.
That makes me think, I know something that you've talked about in your book is, having that characteristic or even quality of active listening, right? And being open, right? So, how can active listening be effectively practiced, to understand and address the needs of younger employees?
Well, something where there's a fair bit of literature about there, and there's some simple ideas I think that are very practical when it comes to better listening. One is to listen to the full range of verbal and nonverbal cues like tone and facial expressions. This is partly harder to do on Zoom, easier to do in person, and partly why you need to work from work some of the time so your boss can give you feedback and you can give feedback to your boss. So that sense that, if I see someone tapping their foot, means generally they're upset, but I don't see that on Zoom. But I see it in person when I look at their whole body language. So you've got to look at not only the words, but the tone of the words and their body language to get a sense is a big part of listening, to my mind. A second one is just be quiet and listen. So don't interrupt. Let them grind to a complete halt. And then what you do is summarize their key points of what they've said and say, Ben, you told me this morning these three things. Did I miss anything? So you check back with them that they're indeed, you got it right. And then you can go on to making your points. And I think this is particularly important not to be, I think many of us, when we listen to someone, are just thinking, what clever repartee do I have? So I kind of, the words are just going through my ears, but I'm not really listening because I have something I really want to say. And I want to get that to you because I'm just so clever. So that's not being a good listener. That's being excessively clever, I think.
What role does purpose play in motivating and engaging millennials and Generation Z at work?
What's interesting, there's a famous bumper sticker when I was young, he who dies with the most toys wins. And when I tell it to my undergrads, they're horrified by the shallowness of the boomers, and rightly so. So some we measured ourselves by what kind of car we drove, what neighborhood we lived in, what kind of suit we had, things like that. And looking back, it was a shallow thing. And we were contributing to climate change. I apologize, Ben, we didn't realize how bad we were screwing up the world. And it's part of what we're passing on to your generation, unfortunately. And today we think beyond those shallow markers of social status to look at what is the meaning? What am I doing with my life, with my work? So you might do something outside of work, but a big part of our life is work for most of us. So we want to make sure what we're doing, there's a nobility to it. There's a bigger purpose than merely making money to pay for our mortgage, pay for our bills, or travel. So I think that is something that a lot of companies are really trying to do, have a more nobility of purpose and really make that front and center. And part of that purpose is what we do as a business, but part of it may be EDI sorts of things as well, that we're going to help people of color. We're going to help women. We're going to help people that have been at disadvantage in the past. And we're going to help them as part of what we do. So that social agenda, which the Zs and millennials are looking for, is something that we need to reflect at work. Part of the good news is I wrote a piece for my Forbes blog, which really received hundreds of thousands of views, and it was entitled "Okay, Boomer," which was a kind of a meme back then. Stop complaining But a year later, you'll want what Z's want. And it was just saying is that we would sit around and complain, but then after a while, we go, actually, that's pretty good. So boomers are looking and Xers are looking for purpose as well. So it's not just millennials and Zs, but we all want a sense of purpose and something bigger than ourselves, that we're helping with climate change somehow in our company, that we're improving things. So Leonel Saputo at Saputo Cheese is talking about how they're trying to reduce the impact of dairy farming, not that they do it, but they buy from dairy farmers, their own packaging and so on, because this resonates with everybody in today's world. So that sense of purpose is becoming very much front and center for most organizations.
And I love that example that you gave as well too, like Saputo and kind of what they're doing and kind of how they're framing that, because I think that brings a lot of fulfillment as well, right? Which then leads to motivation within the end goal of what they're trying to, achieve and strive for, right? So I love that. And so Karl, another question I want to ask, because I know you're big on this and you spoke about it in your book, but if we think of strategies, right? And if we think of as managers, it's evolved like crazy over the last, couple of decades, in terms of how to, lead a workplace. How can we provide constructive feedback, that resonates with a younger, generation?
Well, feedback is something that younger people want. Partly is the way they grew up, because they grew up with video games. We get a lot of feedback. They grew up with a lot more feedback. My wife teaches grade 5 here in Montreal. A lot more feedback than 10 or 15 years ago. And then also we have social media, where you get feedback all the time. And it's kind of sad, Ben, and I hope you don't do this, but when I get up in the morning, one of the things I do is check my social media. How many likes did I get? How many views on LinkedIn? Which is maybe slightly more adult, but I do it. And I think many of us do that. So recognize this generation wants feedback. And so you think about feedback that they're looking for. One is that what we call smart feedback. So that's specific feedback. So it's not general vague things, but specific. In a meeting, you said this, and I think it was mistaken by the customer. You might have been better to say something else. Something you can measure as well. So that how many times you did something, comments you made, something you can achieve. So I can get better. I can change the words I use so that I be less offensive to people. And relevant, it's got to be something that actually matters. And then time-based, so that we do it in an appropriate time, not wait too long. So when I was a manager, I thought maybe 5% of the time about feedback that I would give at IBM to people that worked for me. Where today it's maybe 20% of the time, because people are asking as we leave the meeting, how do you think I did? What can I improve? And they're looking for that feedback from me as someone with more life experience and their boss to give it to them. So I think those are some of the things which strike me. One interesting sidebar, which did not happen in the past, is that people who work for me argue with my feedback. Now, partly it's because I'm giving more. So, at a certain point, sometimes they want more and more feedback and say, guys, I'm making it up. I'm pulling it out of the air. Like, calm down. I have no more to give. Don't worry about it. But they rightly will argue because maybe I'm misjudging something, where before I would never argue with my boss. I might in my mind think about, how messed up their thinking is, but I wouldn't in terms of to them verbally. So this is a bit of a surprise, but I love it because if they argue with my feedback, one, I might be wrong, or two, I can clarify and they can get the point better than I had expressed it already.
I love that. No, I appreciate that explanation. And I also like how you tied in, today's generation of the constant feedback that we're getting on a daily basis, whether we realize it or not. And a question that I'm curious to ask you about is, would you say then if we're getting constant feedback, even from, social media or things that we don't realize in our daily lives, would you say that's very well connected to an everyday results kind of society where we constantly have results that are coming our way?
Well, something where, some of the results in social media are, just dumb. People that have violently different views are silly people that just, and so you get some silly feedback you just got to ignore. And so when I write things to Globe Mail, sometimes I get comments, you go like, oh, gee, these people. Like seriously, they did not understand at all, or maybe I didn't explain it right, or they just hate. I do a column for the Globe on Indigenous Leaders. They just hate Indigenous people, and they're not open to thinking about it in a mature, sound way. So some of it just get rid of, but other feedback you can learn from. But I think most of us will learn to calm down about social media and enjoy it, learn from it, but don't get so carried away and don't spend so much time on your phone.
I love that. Very simple advice. That's great. Karl, something that I want to move to is, how can managers, leverage the strengths and perspectives, of younger generations, to drive or foster, creativity, innovation, and growth in an organization?
Well, it's something where there's two big schools of strategy. One is my colleague Henry Mintzberg at McGill, then Michael Porter at Harvard. And I teach Porter stuff. We gave him an honorary doctorate a few years ago at McGill, and I spent an hour interviewing him for the Globe and Mail. So great guy. But it's emergent versus deliberate strategy. And so that deliberate side, McKinsey, BCG, the five forces, the frameworks is still very useful. But in a turbulent world, emergent strategy, which Mintzberg talks about, is going to be, I think, increasingly relevant. The other still is relevant, and I ask CEOs, and they use both sides of the approach. But the emergent is saying I should listen to boundary spanners, which tend to be younger people. People have a foot in the real world, the turbulent environment, having a foot in our organization, they work for us, but they're dealing with real issues from real customers, real suppliers, real competitors. And what they do is they solve problems in teams across functions, and they come up with ideas. And they're tested in the real world. So the job of senior management is to think about strategy and to decide which strategies that are growing out there in the real world of our organization, which ones should get resources and be spread and scaled and spread across the organization. So rather than have to have the ideas themselves, it's more recognize good ones when they come and tap you on the shoulder.
Makes a lot of sense. And, a follow-up question I have is what are some other maybe mental models or frameworks, that, a CEO or a manager can apply, to really foster even more design thinking or even creativity?
Well, it's interesting because one of the big issues I ask every CEO is, what are you doing with AI and data analytics? And, most CEOs of big companies are over 45 or 50. And so it's not something they've studied, not something they've done. It's not part of their lives. And so they're taking courses on it, and McGill offers some in Harvard and so on. But they look to younger people to lead and guide them in these things because they are more au fait with it. It's just the world they grew up in. So it's something where this is an area that you need to go forward, you need to push yourself forward, but you need to really do it in concert with people that are closer to that world, who are more comfortable with it, have no one. Some of the younger Zs just don't remember a pre-Google world. I do, but most people that are younger don't. So I think bringing that on board is really helpful, and another way that you can kind of bring that generational differences in a very positive way to your organization.
Question that I have that I'm really curious to ask is, when we think of also a quality question to ask, if a leader is I'm doing my best, to be the best leader that I want to be as a CEO, manager, even coworker, what are some quality questions that they could ask themselves, or even writing prompts, to be the best leader possibly that they could be?
I think a central question is, what do you think? So explain your thinking, how you're approaching a problem, then say, what do you guys think? How can this be done better? How do you think we should approach it? So when I travel with students, went to 50 of us, 30 students and 20 alumni to Ghana and the Cote d'Ivoire early this year. I have 2 undergrads who organize it with me. And I say to them, you guys can overrule me. And we have 3 votes. So 2 beats 3. Now I'll say sometimes McGill says we need travel insurance. Bam, done deal. We've got to do that. There's no question about it. But it's something where when it comes to other things, I'm quite happy to have them correct my thinking and outvote me. So I think this is a good question to ask is, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think?
That's a powerful question, Karl. And I think, it really challenges them to put themselves outside of their own shoes, right? To really scope out like the big picture. So I love that. And I know a big mentor of yours, that you spoke about last time that we chatted is Henry Mintzberg, and I know he's done a lot of incredible work in management and leadership and, how to manage, and how to be a great leader. So I have a question for you. Like, what are some, key learnings that you've learned from him, and if you want to share any stories?
Well, something where we talked about the strategy part, which I've taught with him many times. It's also the sense of humility. We have one of the great management thinkers of the world, without a doubt. And he is someone that absolutely listens. We have the 50-50 rule in the executive programs we've done together for years, that at most the professors can talk 50% of the time, but it's up to the managers, the executives in the audience to discuss with each other and learn from each other. And we start our day with reflections for an hour where you write in your journal, what did you get from yesterday? And then beyond that, what you're doing as well is then you, in groups of 6 at your table group, discuss with other managers, practicing managers, we call them. And then we do it as a group for everyone, where Henry and I might lead it, but lead it is a strong word. I'll just go, how about table one? What do you think? And a good session is one, I don't say a word because they're discussing things with each other and learning from each other. So I think that sense of humility and having ideas, but getting people who are in the real world to apply them and tell you how to apply them is a very great way of learning for everybody in the room, including the professors.
I love that, Karl. Well, thanks a lot, for sharing that. And, I want to take this last, little bit of time, Karl. It was really nice to catch up today. It was really nice to, hear about your latest book. So again, congrats. And, I want to take this last moment, to really thank you for being here today. And also thank you for continuing to have an impact on younger generations. Like, I see that not only through your work that you're doing here and your book, but you walk the talk. So I really want to take this last moment again to thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, Ben. Always fun to talk to you and run into you.